Before we start, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Also, can you please tell me from where and what time you're watching? Thanks.
It wasn't the flickering lanterns or the whispers in the dark that first unsettled me. It was the doll, glassy-eyed, cracked, and left inexplicably in the middle of the kitchen floor. I hadn't seen it before, but something about it felt alive, as if it had been waiting for me all along. Rewind a week earlier. I had arrived in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, eager, or rather, resigned, to take up a caretaker position at a remote Amish farmhouse. My cousin had insisted it would be good for my writing, though I suspected he just wanted me out of the city. The landscape was breathtaking, almost unreal. Rolling hills, endless green fields, and a red brick barn that seemed to be pulled straight from a postcard. But the moment I stepped off the bus, something felt wrong. The air was heavy, almost oppressive, and the silence wasn't peaceful. It was unnatural. The Amish family I was to work for greeted me with reserved smiles. They were polite but distant, their old-fashioned clothes and solemn expressions only adding to the odd atmosphere. The farmhouse itself was beautiful, yet haunting, with its creaking floors and walls that seemed to breathe. The family, a kindly elderly couple, their adult children, and a handful of giggling grandchildren, seemed warm enough. Yet, beneath their smiles, I detected something guarded, as if they were hiding a dark secret. My first few days passed uneventfully, save for the odd creak of the house settling, or the occasional shadow flickering in the corner of my eye. The Amish way of life intrigued me. No electricity, no modern conveniences, just faith and hard work. Their traditions were steeped in superstition, with whispered tales of hauntings, curses, and vengeful spirits passed down through generations. I dismissed it as folklore, until the whispers began. At night, as the farmhouse settled into silence, I would hear them, faint murmurs carried on the still air, rising and falling like the cadence of an unseen conversation. At first I thought it was the wind, but the wind doesn't call your name. Then came the figure in the wheat field. I saw it one evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon. A silhouette stood motionless among the swaying stalks. I squinted, trying to make out details, but the figure dissolved the moment I stepped closer, as if it had never been there. By the end of the week, I couldn't ignore the mounting unease. The family's polite smiles had grown strained, and their once vivid stories about the farm became clipped and vague. Driven by curiosity and a growing sense of dread, I began digging into the farmhouse's history. What I found chilled me to the bone. Hidden in an old chest in the attic were letters, brittle with age, recounting the tale of an ancestor named Margaretha, a rebellious woman accused of practicing dark magic. She had been cast out by the community. Before her execution, she cursed her bloodline, vowing to torment them for eternity. The family had endured decades of unexplained tragedies. Livestock slaughtered without reason, children falling ill, and strange symbols appearing on the walls. And now, I was part of this cursed narrative. When I confronted the family, their reaction was a mix of fear and resignation. They had lived with the curse for so long that they had accepted it as their fate. But I wasn't willing to give in. Together, we sought the help of the community elders, who reluctantly agreed to perform a cleansing ritual. The night of the exorcism was suffocatingly still. We gathered in the farmhouse, lanterns casting trembling shadows on the walls. The elders chanted in Pennsylvania Dutch, their voices growing louder as the air turned icy. Then it began. The floorboards groaned as if under the weight of unseen footsteps. The windows rattled and the house seemed to breathe with a malevolent life of its own. Suddenly she appeared, a flickering, translucent figure, her face twisted with rage. The room erupted into chaos. The elders' chants faltered, and the spirit's shrieks filled the air, an inhuman sound that clawed at my very soul. But we didn't stop. With every ounce of strength and faith, we pressed on, the chants growing louder, more determined. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The air lightened, the oppressive weight lifted, and the spirit was gone. Or so we thought. As I packed my things the next morning, relieved to leave the haunted farmhouse behind, I noticed it. A porcelain doll lying in the center of the kitchen floor, its face cracked, but its eyes unnervingly clear. I hadn't seen it before, yet something about it felt familiar. Its glassy eyes bore an uncanny resemblance to the sketches of Margareta I had found in the attic. My stomach turned as a cold realization washed over me. Was this a warning, a reminder, or something far worse? As I boarded the bus back to the city, I couldn't shake the feeling that the farmhouse, and whatever haunted it, wasn't done with me. The fields blurred into the distance, but the doll's lifeless eyes stayed with me, a chilling promise that some curses never truly die. I never should have gone into that farmhouse. It wasn't the isolation that unnerved me, nor the eerie quiet that blanketed the rolling fields of rural Pennsylvania. No, it was the watchful eyes of the Amish community, their polite yet distant demeanor, their cryptic warnings about boundaries I mustn't cross. My name is Ethan, a city boy who thought he could outrun the chaos of urban life. 6 months ago, I packed up everything and moved to an isolated Amish farmhouse, craving peace. The charm of the simple life quickly pulled me in. The smell of fresh hay, the rhythmic hum of horse-drawn plows, and the quiet. Oh, the quiet. But silence can be deceptive. At first, I embraced the tranquility. But soon, cracks began to form. The farmhouse held secrets, one of which was a locked room on the second floor. "Never open it," the previous owner had said with a grim face, handing me the keys to everything except that door. I laughed it off at the time, but his warning lingered. The Amish elders held late-night meetings, their faces drawn with a seriousness that felt out of place in such a serene setting. The children, too, avoided the old barn at the edge of my property like it housed a monster. Their wide-eyed glances and sharp reprimands from their parents were hard to miss. The nights were the worst. That locked room wasn't just a room. It was alive. It groaned and creaked in ways the rest of the house didn't. Sometimes I could swear I heard faint whispers, muffled yet insistent, coming from the other side of the door. My curiosity clawed at me, but I held back, honoring the previous owner's warning. Then came the invitation. It was for a community gathering, an event that happened once a year. The Amish, normally reserved, insisted I attend. Under the flickering firelight of the gathering, I learned of an old legend tied to the farmhouse. A story of bountiful harvests secured through unusual means. The elders spoke in hushed tones, their faces illuminated in the glow of the flames, their eyes betraying a shadow of fear. That night, as I stared out my window at the barn, its silhouette cast an ominous shadow across the moonlit fields. Something inside me snapped. The locked room, the barn, the whispers, they were all connected. I had to know. Breaking into the locked room was easier than I expected. The door splintered under my weight, and inside the air was thick, oppressive, as if the room had been holding its breath for decades. Artifacts were scattered everywhere, strange carvings, faded scriptures, and old records. My hands trembled as I pieced it together. The Amish community had once performed blood sacrifices to ensure a plentiful harvest. And the barn. That's where it all happened. The realization hit me like ice water. I wasn't just the new guy in town. I was the outsider, the perfect scapegoat for their twisted tradition. My blood ran cold as I imagined the elders' watchful gazes, the way their silence seemed to hold secrets. I needed to escape. The night before the harvest festival, I packed my things in secret. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a gunshot in the stillness of the farmhouse. I avoided windows, certain that shadowy figures lurked just beyond them. Midnight came, and I made my move. The barn loomed in the distance as I crept through the fields, its silhouette darker than the night itself. Behind me, I swore I heard footsteps, soft, deliberate, gaining on me. My heart pounded as I pushed forward, adrenaline masking the searing pain of twigs and rocks cutting into my feet. By some miracle, I reached my car and sped away, the gravel crunching beneath my tires like a final warning. The city's chaos, once unbearable, was now a refuge, but peace didn't come with my escape. The farmhouse haunted me in my dreams, its locked room, its dark history, and the barn's shadow. Even now, in the bustling noise of the city, I feel their eyes on me. The Amish didn't just let me leave, they let me escape. And I can't shake the feeling that someday, when the fields grow barren and the harvest is thin, they'll come looking for me. The ritual isn't complete. Not yet. The first thing I noticed was the silence, an unnatural, oppressive silence that felt alive. The air hung heavy, thick with an eerie stillness, as if the land itself was holding its breath. The Amish farmhouse stood before me, a crumbling relic painted in faded white and cherrywood, its windows dark and hollow, like the empty eyes of a corpse. The moon hung low, casting long shadows across the forgotten woods that surrounded the property. Those shadows seemed to move, to slither, whispering secrets older than time. I had come here chasing knowledge, drawn to the simplicity and mystery of Amish culture. But as I stood in the cold moonlight, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was a mistake. Something about the farmhouse felt wrong, unnervingly wrong. The family greeted me warmly, their smiles kind but their eyes guarded. They welcomed me into their home, a sanctuary of hand-carved furniture and dimly lit oil lamps. But there were rules, strict, unyielding rules. Certain areas of the farm were off limits, they said, their voices tight with quiet fear. Whispers of the forbidden rooms lingered in the air, spoken only in hushed tones over dinner. Their warnings seemed etched into the very walls, yet they wouldn't tell me why. It didn't take long to understand why they were so cautious. At night, the house came alive. Shadows moved where no light should cast them. Whispers floated through the air, faint but insistent, calling my name in voices that were neither male nor female. My belongings shifted when I wasn't looking, and once I felt it, an icy invisible touch brushing against my arm. The family spoke of a curse, an ancient story passed down through their bloodline. Long ago, their ancestor, a woman accused of witchcraft, had been shunned by the community. She vanished into the woods one stormy night, leaving behind nothing but fear and unanswered questions. The farm, they said, had never been the same. The whispers began after her disappearance, along with the strange scratches on the walls and the unrelenting chill in the air. But it was the attic that truly broke my resolve. The attic was one of the forbidden places, and I'd been warned not to go there. Yet curiosity drove me. One night, I crept up the creaking staircase, the air growing colder with every step. The door was locked, but it gave way with a little force, and what I found inside froze my blood. The walls were carved with symbols, ancient malevolent sigils that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The wooden floor was stained, darkened with what could only be old blood. A small rotting altar sat in the center of the room, draped in tattered cloth and surrounded by blackened candles. The air reeked of decay and something darker, something foul. Before I could leave, I felt it. A presence. The room grew heavier, the darkness thicker, pressing down on me until I could barely breathe. A cold, guttural voice whispered from the shadows, and suddenly, I wasn't alone. The spirit attacked that night. It wasn't a ghost, but a force, a wrathful storm of hate and vengeance that seemed to pour out of every corner of the farmhouse. The walls shook, the air screamed, and every light was snuffed out. I ran, my heart hammering as the family screamed in terror. The spirit wasn't just targeting me, it was lashing out at everyone, its fury boundless and relentless. In desperation, the family summoned the Amish elders, respected figures known for their ability to cleanse evil. They arrived just before dawn, carrying tools of faith and tradition. What followed was a battle unlike anything I had ever witnessed. The elders prayed, their voices steady as the spirit roared in defiance. Objects flew through the air, unseen hands clawed at their faces, but they held their ground. Slowly, agonizingly, the spirit weakened, its screams fading into the night. By sunrise, the farmhouse was quiet again. The family wept in relief, but their eyes told a different story. One of lingering fear. They asked me to leave, their kindness wrapped in urgency. I didn't argue. As I drove away, I glanced back in the rearview mirror. The farmhouse stood silent in the golden light of dawn, its windows dark and empty. But just as I was about to turn my eyes back to the road, I saw it, a shadow in the upstairs window. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching me leave. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that I didn't escape. Not entirely. The whispers still come at night, soft and insistent, calling my name. And in the quiet moments when the world around me is still, I feel it. The icy brush of an unseen hand, reminding me that the curse of the farmhouse is far from over. The farmhouse stood in eerie isolation, nestled deep within an ocean of amber wheat fields. At first glance, It seemed like the perfect escape, a serene retreat far removed from the chaos of city life. But something about it felt wrong. The way it sat under the fading light of the setting sun, its shadow stretching unnaturally long across the earth, sent a shiver crawling down my spine. I had come seeking refuge from the modern world, a week without phones, internet, or the relentless buzz of urban life. I craved simplicity, a break from the constant hum of technology, and the Amish life seemed the perfect antidote. Yet as my car bumped along the poorly marked roads leading to the farmhouse, an inexplicable sense of unease began to settle over me. The Amish greeted me warmly, their smiles genuine but tinged with an unspoken wariness. Elder Jedediah, the head of the family, carried a quiet authority that made me uneasy. The farmhouse itself, though quaint and charming, seemed too quiet. At night, the silence pressed in like a living thing, broken only by the distant, ghostly toll of a bell. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible. A low, mournful chime carried on the wind. I dismissed it as a trick of my imagination, a city dweller's mind struggling to adjust to the stillness. But the sound grew louder each night, cutting through the darkness with an otherworldly resonance. And weren't the bells supposed to be silent? One evening over dinner, Elder Jedediah spoke in hushed tones of the village's silent bell. Long ago, he explained, the bell had been silenced, a necessary act to quell the misfortunes it brought. He described it as a harbinger of eerie happenings and spectral visitors. His words were met with solemn nods from the others, their faces etched with fear. That night, the bell's tolling returned, louder and more insistent, as if challenging the silence imposed upon it. By the third night, the once idyllic farmhouse became a nightmare. Shadows flitted at the edges of my vision, vanishing before I could turn my head. Objects moved on their own, shifting just enough to leave me doubting my sanity. Livestock disappeared from the barn, leaving behind nothing but scattered straw and the faint scent of something metallic. Driven by a mix of curiosity and desperation, I began searching for answers. Beneath the barn, hidden under loose floorboards, I found it, the silent bell. It was massive, its bronze surface tarnished and cracked, yet it seemed to hum with a life of its own. The air around it felt thick, heavy with an invisible pressure that made it hard to breathe. As if my discovery awakened something, the haunting escalated. The bell's toll now echoed constantly in my ears, a relentless, deafening melody of despair. Shadows took on human shapes, lingering longer than before, and the whispers, they called my name. Elder Jedediah insisted there was only one way to silence the bell permanently, a ritual. Armed with chalk, strange symbols, and a list of steps that sounded like they were torn from an ancient text, I descended into the chamber once more. The air was colder now, thick with malevolence. Each step of the ritual seemed to provoke the bell's wrath, its tolls growing louder and more furious. Figures loomed closer, their features indistinct, but their intentions clear. The final step required me to strike the bell one last time, an act that sent shockwaves through the chamber. The sound was deafening, a crescendo of chaos that ended as abruptly as it began. The silence that followed was profound, almost suffocating in its intensity. When I emerged from the barn, the shadows were gone, and the air felt lighter. The Amish community thanked me with a mix of relief and gratitude, though their eyes betrayed lingering fear. They urged me to leave before nightfall, their happy waves a stark contrast to the dread that still clung to the farmhouse. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the ordeal wasn't truly over. Just as the farmhouse faded from view in my rearview mirror, I heard it, a faint, distant chime. My grip tightened on the steering wheel as an icy chill ran up my spine. Maybe it was just my imagination, or maybe the silent bell was never meant to stay silent. Driving through the endless moonlit expanse of the Amish countryside, a peculiar stillness pressed against the car windows, heavy and suffocating. My name is Sam, an aspiring anthropologist, and I was here to study simplicity in its purest form, a final year project centered on Amish life. The farmhouse, my temporary home, was supposed to be a peaceful retreat from modern chaos. Instead, it became the backdrop for the most horrifying chapter of my life. Jacob and Martha greeted me warmly at the farmhouse. Their smiles were genuine, but something lingered beneath them, A weight, a shadow. I ignored it, chalking it up to nerves. The house itself was a living relic of the past, every creak of its floorboards whispering tales of simpler times. Yet, on my first night, simplicity revealed its darker side. The sounds began faintly, a muffled hum like distant conversations carried on a restless wind. Then, the faint toll of a bell, soft yet jarring, sliced through the silence. I awoke in a cold sweat, dismissing it as my imagination adjusting to the unfamiliar. But as the nights went on, the sounds grew louder, more distinct. Whispers of sorrow, cries of anguish, and the ghostly toll of that cursed bell. The following day, while exploring the farmhouse, I came across a locked door. When I asked Jacob about it, he gave a dismissive chuckle, saying it was just a storage room, unsafe due to clutter. His tone was casual, but his eyes betrayed unease. Something was hidden behind that door, and I couldn't let it go. As I spent more time in the house, its inviting warmth began to twist into something sinister. I discovered a trapdoor beneath an old rug in the dining area leading to a hidden basement. My heart pounded as I descended into the darkness, and the sight that greeted me was like a punch to the gut. Amish clothing, neatly folded but stained with dark, dried blood, lay scattered alongside rusted tools that spoke of violence rather than labor. I confronted Jacob, but his demeanor remained unchanged, as if he hadn't heard my accusations. That night, Martha vanished. Her absence was explained away as a trip to a neighboring community, but I wasn't convinced. Later that day, I found an old, weathered diary tucked behind a stack of books in the sitting room. It was Jacob's. The diary's entries started innocently enough, accounts of daily life, farming routines, and family moments. But as I read on, they darkened. Jacob wrote of children who rebelled against Amish traditions, choosing modernity over their roots. These sinners, as he called them, had to be punished. The entries became cryptic, referring to rituals of penance and silence, their fates shrouded in eerie vagueness. Fueled by equal parts dread and determination, I broke into the locked room that night. What I saw will haunt me forever. Chains hung from the walls, their rusted links stained with evidence of suffering. Knives, carefully arranged on a wooden table, bore the marks of use. In one corner, a pile of bones sat like a grotesque monument to Jacob's twisted sense of justice. My blood ran cold. As I stood frozen, the door creaked open behind me. Jacob was there, his face a mask of calm insanity. His voice was soft but firm as he said, "You shouldn't have come here, Sam." He lunged toward me, but age dulled his speed and adrenaline gave me wings. I bolted from the room, through the maze of hallways and out into the fields. The darkness was oppressive, but the faint glow of a neighbor's light guided me. I stumbled into their yard, gasping out my story. They called the authorities, who arrived with grim efficiency. Jacob was arrested, and the farmhouse was searched thoroughly. What they found made headlines for weeks. Martha was discovered alive, drugged, and locked away in a hidden compartment. The investigation also uncovered connections to cold cases spanning decades, young people who had vanished without a trace, their lives extinguished by Jacob's fanaticism. I left that place a changed person. The allure of simplicity now felt like a mask, hiding the potential for unspeakable horrors. The experience didn't deter my anthropological pursuits, but it did leave me with a haunting lesson. Even the most tranquil facades can conceal the darkest truths. As I drove away, the farmhouse fading into the horizon, a chill ran down my spine. Somewhere in the distance, I could have sworn I heard the faint toll of a bell.